the largest living thing ever measured was not actually a dinosaur or a blue whale, but was a Victorian tree. And in 1879, a Victorian government surveyor called William Ferguson was in the Watts River catchment, just near Healesville, and described going into an area before what were then called the timber splitters had gone in, and said, look, several of these trees are just absolutely immense. And one that had fallen, he measured with the tape measure. And he measured it from the base to the point where it had broken in its fall. And at the point where it had broken in its fall, it was 3 feet in diameter. So it still went a long way higher than that. But that distance that he measured was 435 feet in the old money. Now, even at 435 feet, there's no tree in the world today close to that height. But in fact, as he said, he estimated, looking at the crown, that it was over 500 feet when it was fully standing. That's about 150 odd metres. You know, that's as high as the tower on the Arts Centre spire. Now, we had several trees that were actually reliably measured that were taller than any tree living today. And we got rid of them right through to the 1930s. And we're actually only now beginning to discover some of the things about our forests. I mean, we've talked about the potoroo, the long-footed potoroo, first described to science in 1980. Very recent. Think of just in the year 1995, 15 years ago, 3 things that were discovered. In East Gippsland, we found a new species of eucalypt, an area that had already been logged for decades. A whole new species of tree. Same year, we found the Wollemi pine in the Blue Mountains. You know, a tree that had somehow survived from the age of the dinosaurs. And in Mount Reid in Tasmania, they found a stand of Huon pine. Now, that in itself was not unusual, but it was several hectares. And Huon pine come in male and female sexes, apparently. This was only one sex, and they couldn't work out how it could be. And summarising, they found that it was in fact all the one tree. It was coppiced. And then by pollen sampling and so on, from the pollen dropped by the Huon pine, they found it was over 20,000 years old. Oldest tree in the world. And tonight we've heard about a new species of crayfish in an area they were going to log in Brown Mountain. I acted for a lot of people who were arrested at Brown Mountain, about 300 people in 1989-90. It was just before the federal election of March 1990, and there were substantial areas in those days that were protected as being national heritage. And the Commonwealth government had the power to stop the logging, but the Victorian Labor government at the time wanted to have the logging on Brown Mountain. There were a series of arrests, and it got to very large numbers for that area. And I mean, the people that got arrested included Greg Barber. It's one of my clients, and my wife was arrested with my now 20-year-old daughter in utero. And we thought we'd saved that forest. We were told, yes, there'll be a study to find prudent and feasible alternatives and you'll be right. So that agreement was reached. Federal election happened. The study went on for a year, there was no logging, and then all bets were off. And this has been one of the histories of the logging movement. We think we've had a win for the environment, and the loggers come back and find some other way around it. I wanted to tell you about Alistair Knight. Alistair was not really interested in the environment much, but he was sitting in a cafe in Brunswick Street, Fitzroy, having a coffee. And a young man walked in and said, "Will you buy me a coffee if I read you a poem?" And Alistair said, "Okay, I will." And so this young man, who I only know of by the name of Squelch, then read a poem. And Alistair brought him a cup of coffee. And Squelch said, "Have you ever heard of Goolunguk?" And Alistair said, "No." "Well, we're going down to Goolunguk to have a look. It's all this beautiful forest down in East Gippsland. We're going tonight. Do you want to come?" And Alistair said, "Okay." So he got a sleeping bag and got into the little van that was going down and travelled for 6-7 hours, whatever it was. Got there, got out in the middle of the night, put up a little tent, got some sleep, got up in the morning and said to Squelch, "What happens now? What are we doing now? There's all these people milling about." And Squelch said, "Well, I'm going black wallabying." And Alistair said, "What's that?" And Squelch told him what it was. And you can come, well, I'll tell you what it is. It's running through an active coop while they're felling trees to try and get them to stop. Anyway, Alistair didn't want to do that. But there was this middle-aged guy that looked pretty reliable there called Bob. So he thought, well, I'll go with this bloke, Bob. And he said, "What are you doing, Bob?" He said, "I'm going for a walk. Would you like to come?" So Alistair went for a walk up the ridge with Bob and a woman called Emma. And up they went up the ridge and sat down on a log, listened to a lyrebird, then started to stroll down. They got back down to the cleared area. There was a line of police. And a policeman stepped forward and said, "If you do not go from where you are now across to that bridge immediately, you will be arrested. Will you go?" Alistair thought, "I'll do whatever Bob does here." And Bob said, "No, I won't." "No, I won't," said Alistair. "No, I won't," said Emma. "Well, you're all under arrest." So he's thinking, how did this happen? So he's taken there, he's sitting in the back of the divvy van. And he's there for about an hour. Someone says, "Senator Brown, will you do such and such?" He looked at this Bob bloke. He's like a senator. And as it happened, I was briefed to act in the case. And we were on at Maui Court. And Alistair the prosecutor was Betty King, who's now a judge. But Alistair, I noticed, was having this long and detailed conversation with Betty King. Betty's smiling and talking to him. And turned out he was friendly with Betty's daughter. Chat, chat, chat. And finally, Betty says, "And what are you doing here today?" And Alistair said, "You're prosecuting me." And what happened towards the end of that case was my family came down to Maui and we all went for a walk with Bob Brown and various other people on the Bawbaws, which is near Maui, so that was good. It was the last day of school, and I think Georgia was in prep and Rachel was in grade 1 or something, and they arrived down and it's just a week before Christmas, and they'd never seen Daddy in court before, and I was just at the point of sort of trying to get another date. You know, there's nothing dramatic happening, and they were just agog, and So I go off to talk to people about this, and I introduced my wife Sally to Betty King, and she was having a chat. And Betty was being very nice to the girls, and oh girls, it's next week's Christmas, and Santa will be coming, and what do you want from Santa? And Rachel said that she wanted a baby born doll. And you, what about you, Georgia? What would you like? And Georgia looked up at Betty with her big brown eyes and said, I want my daddy to win all his court cases. We did win that one because Bob was arrested for obstructing lawful forest operations at Goolungook. And the forest operations weren't lawful because the Heritage Rivers Act required them to leave a buffer zone of 200 metres either side of the Goolungook River. And they hadn't. They'd logged right to within 100 metres of it. Now, the effect of that was, a bit of law here, there was a section in the Heritage Rivers Act that said that any instrument which purports to violate the provisions of this Act is void and of no effect. That meant that the entire forest management plan for East Gippsland was void and of no effect. So it was illegal to actually log in East Gippsland. Well, they didn't quite know how to sort that out. They did a few things. They appealed. They lost the appeal in the Supreme Court. There had been a lot of people arrested, and they were all acquitted. But they passed retrospective legislation to validate the logging and to enable them to go back in. So that even though it was illegal to have logged, they just validated it all after the event. I guess I've been involved in the logging dispute now for nearly 40 years, one way or another. Back since the wood chipping became really big in the 70s, and you were seeing things like the Hamer government was creating an alpine walking track. And you'd have the track, and they'd leave a little 10-metre buffer of timber on either side of the track, and then there'd be the Battle of the Somme beyond that. And that was supposed to be okay. And I kept thinking, well, it'll be better if Labor gets in. Need I say more? Look, one of the reasons that this problem is here is because we have a two-party system which has enabled the parties to get together and keep this off the agenda. And that system is broken. And that's why I'm standing for Parliament, because I want to see Greens in the lower house. I think we're past the time for transition plans, for, saying that it's all okay. What was it that was promised before the last state election? That all old growth forest last remaining significant stands of old growth forest in East Gippsland would be saved. That's what we were promised. And yet a court case has to be fought to protect some of the most significant old growth forest in the state, if not the country, in circumstances where it's been known for decades that it is significant. And that's what the heritage listing was all about in the 1980s. So I want to see an end to logging, native forest logging. I don't actually want to see it made nicer. I think there's been too many chances for that to happen. And I think that it can all be plantation. From now on, if you cut down a tree, it should be one that you've grown yourself on your own land. That's basically what I think.